thank you so much for coming on. Super excited to
Yeah,
chat.
thanks for having me.
Love the IG page.
Thank you.
Man, I'll say this now. I might say it on air. We'll see. But so many people I feel like that have like a niche are one trick ponies. So it's so nice to see somebody that is like, yeah, you're talking about the foot and that's your focus, but you're talking about all the other parts of the system and how the foot impacts these other things. So it's very cool.
Yeah,
very cool.
it's been fun. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
How long has that been going on?
I started all of that in 2017.
Okay. Very cool.
But I've been seeing foot and gait patients for about 20, 25 years.
So you're not new to this.
No.
No. I know. I try and think of it like this. I just don't want my face to represent how old I really am. So,
No doubt.
as long as I try and keep the facial freshness up and stay in some modicum of shape, hopefully it'll.
Well, you look good.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. You too. Hopefully people won't know how old I am. So,
right.
But yeah, I mean, I think we got some fun stuff to tackle today.
Yeah, for sure.
Again, I think your page is just such a wealth of information. So I tried to go there. I mean, obviously I know that's your niche, but to be able to go there and just some of the topics that you're talking about, I think are super relevant too. And you asked about audience, generally trainers and coaches, but I also like to kind of lump into that, like the highly educated fitness consumer, right?
Yeah.
Like the person that just, is into this stuff, wants to learn more. So you can feel free to nerd out as much as you want. I think most of the people would enjoy that aspect of it. So wherever you want to take it, I'm happy to go. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a good adjunct to everything that you're doing.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, like that's kind of my thing, right? Is like I try and find these really like world-class people and then, okay, like what makes them great? Let's break this down and then bring it back to like the big picture and how this fits into training, coaching, and all that stuff. So
great. Okay,
cool.
Let's do it. Yeah.
All right. Give me a second here. I think we're all set up. I had to, sorry, you were waiting for a second. I had to get rid of all of the creatures. Anytime I try and close the door, they're like, oh, what's going on?
I know.
Like we need to be in there. So.
Well, I got one he sits in the sun right there. So.
Oh, okay. Oh, nice. Yes, mine want to be in here or on my lap or whatever. So yeah. It's like the second you close the door, they want to be there. So
right.
Okay. All right. All good?
Ready to roll.
Awesome. Let's do this.
Okay.
Courtney, thanks so much for coming on the show here today. Really, really excited to have you on. Could you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. Big fan of your stuff. So thank you.
Thank you.
A little bit about me. I am a mom.
Okay.
I have she's about to be 12. She's a spicy middle schooler. So
I have a spicy middle schooler too. I know what that's like.
She came home from school the other day, and will be a good segue for what we're going to talk about today. She said to me, Mom, I don't know why you make me wear these platypus shoes and all the other kids get to wear Nikes. So
I love it.
So I'm sure we'll be talking about that later. But so she's my little pride and joy. I am a chiropractor in Lakewood, Colorado. So I have a practice here. We have kind of your wellness. We got 4 docs in here, some physical therapists, and we have a gym. So that's been a big nice. Addition. And then I started Gait Happens, which is my online consultation company that we started about 5 years ago. So I feel very blessed to have been able to spread the word of foot health. It took off on us pretty quickly, and it's been great. So yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, we'll come back to that. Before we go there, I want to get like your backstory. How did you get started in physical preparation? When did you start working out? Like what got you into just this whole world that we live in now?
Movement has always been my therapy.
Yep.
Ever since I was a kid, my parents went through a divorce right when I was getting into high school. Okay. And it was one of those really formative, it's a very formative time. And I was just kind of a wild child, and I was feeling all the things, and getting myself into some trouble and doing all that stuff. And the one thing I knew I could always bank on to feel better was movement, whether that was going for a walk or going for a run, or I was a ballet dancer. And it just, from the very beginning, I always remember that as being such an impactful and so necessary for not only my, physical health, which I really didn't care about at the time. I mean, I was in high school. It was more, I knew it was making me feel better. So I just kept doing it. And then it's really carried me through my life. And it's one of the reasons I ended up in Colorado. I had a practice in Chicago for a while, and it's a little cloudy there. I mean, I love Chicago, but I just knew I needed something else. And when I finally got to Colorado, the sun's out a lot here, and I just, you're in a bad mood, you walk up the mountain, and I just wouldn't turn around until it changed. So it's always been a very important for my mental capacity and health, and I think that's why it's just stuck with me for so long.
I love it. Are you originally from the Midwest?
Pittsburgh.
Okay. So I'm Indiana, just by and large.
Yeah.
But yes, the grayness can wear on you.
Yes.
We've had a pretty mild year this year, but that's actually, my sister moved out to Colorado a couple years ago, and that was a big part of it. Yeah, she's like, I need more sun. I need to be able to get outside and hike and do all those things. So very cool.
It makes such a difference. It really does.
Yeah. Okay. Last but not least, really two-part question here. Talk to me about your career path. Take me from high school to chiropractic school, all that, and then walk us through like what got you into feet, because it's a very narrow topic. So walk us through that.
I was a ballet dancer all from when I was a kid and all the way through high school. I was in the Pittsburgh Ballet Theater, and I spent a lot of time, obviously, on my feet in point shoes. I remember shoving lamb's wool in my point shoes and just thinking, why this hurts so bad. But we spent hours, and then I had bunions and I had foot pain. And then once I gave up the ballet, I was a triathlete.
Okay.
So then I did all the running, swimming, and biking. And I just couldn't seem to get over this hump of continuous foot injuries, from bunions to neuromas to a stress fracture. And so coupled with that, and then my love for movement, I was like, all right, let's get into a field where we can help people. So I went to chiropractic school, and I think we had a half a semester of foot and gait education. That was it. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, this is all we're getting.
Right.
And then orthotic companies would sponsor this chiropractic schools.
Mm-hmm.
So every student would get free orthotics. And, that's what we did. We had a half a semester of learning and free orthotics.
You're indoctrinated, right?
And I was like, oh, okay. And so I got out of school and I started treating the feet and became obsessed with it. And I ended up, really dispensing a lot of orthotics. That's what we knew to do. It was, you have foot pain. I got very good at looking at someone's foot and figuring out, how do we brace this thing?
Yeah.
And this was in Chicago. And then when I moved to Colorado, I ended up working in 2 orthotic labs. So I was doing my, foot and gait work, but then I was working in the orthotic lab. So it was a constant back and forth. And I really thought at the time, you're doing the best that you can for the patient. And in the meantime, I'm wearing these orthotics. I'm training for my races, and I'm going, something is not working here.
Right.
Because we'd be posting my orthotic, and then my knee would hurt, and then I'd take out the post, and then and it just something wasn't working. So through kind of self-exploration, I just thought to myself, the foot has more muscles in it. We have 4 layers of intrinsic muscles in the foot. Like, what am I doing here? I would never brace my back for this long.
Right.
And so I started to play around, and then I started to do my own research and surround myself. You stand on the shoulders of giants, and just having lots of conversations. And I started to pull myself out of them and focus on my foot strength and foot health. And then things really started, and it happened pretty quickly.
Really?
And I started to integrate that with my patients. And I was like, I think we're onto something here.
Yeah.
So it's been quite the kind of journey with all of that.
Yeah. Okay, so I already want to go off script because this is super interesting to me, and reminds me of something. I dealt with a knee issue. This was probably like 2005. I was powerlifting and couldn't quite figure it out, and it led me on this path of, all the traditional things that they say to do aren't working. So I'm interested in that time. You talked about this self-exploration. Like, what were some things that you do? Like, were you just trying stuff on yourself? Were you reading research? Like, what were you into at that point in time that started to take you down this other path?
Well, I think I've always felt, when I'm standing on my feet, how do I feel? Being in the background that I was, you're kind of aware of how your body's feeling. And I remember taking my shoes off and just balancing. And I'm like, wow, I feel a lot better when I'm balancing without all this stuff underneath my foot.
Right.
And to this day, that's one of the assessments. Like when I talk to my patients, because our clients will have been in, really thick cushion shoes and orthotics for a very long period of time, as was myself. And, to have these conversations can be difficult, but every single time, like, just take your shoe off and just balance and tell me what you feel. Mm-hmm. What does your foot feel?
Yeah.
So it was little things like that. And then I started to play around with, I'm going to, take this orthotic out for a little bit and see what happens. And it was a, gradual process. And then, yes, it was a lot of reading and saying, well, we can look at how strong the foot can get. And now the research is just flying. I mean, it's coming out now.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Okay. So I just want to hear your answer on this. And it's kind of a warm-up question, but I'd love to hear just your thoughts. How big of an impact does the foot make on performance?
I mean,
you created a whole business around it.
Yeah. Okay. So a good friend of mine, Jay DeCherry, he's a big biomechanical clinical researcher. And he always said that you can't build a jet engine on a paper airplane. Hmm. And I always think about that because we're always looking at like strengthening our core and strengthening our glutes and doing all of this stuff to put on a platform, to put on a foundation that can't hold us up, if you will.
Yeah.
It doesn't make a lot of sense. And if you look at the primary functions of the foot, they're twofold. One is to absorb shock, mm-hmm. and one is to become a rigid lever for propulsion.
Yep.
So if you look at any sport, jumping, for example, when you land, you have to absorb shock. And the first opportunity for that is at the foot.
Yeah.
And when the foot unlocks, then you have this beautiful cascade of exactly what was supposed to happen, of everything unlocking to absorb shock. And then from the foot then becomes this rigid lever so that we can be efficient to jump up.
Yeah.
And I think you can apply that to really any activity. And it's that foot that's extremely important, especially when you look at sports like sprinting and jumping. I mean, that's power. The power is going to come from push-off.
Yep. Okay. So how long did you say you had of like gait and foot anatomy and all that in school?
About a half a semester.
Okay. Well, I hate to tell you this, but you're probably a half semester ahead of most of us, right? Considering like we never talked about the foot.
Yeah.
Maybe we did in like clinical anatomy, like first year, you talk about gastroc soleus. That's it. Right. So what I would love for you to do is help us all understand kind of the differences between normal and maybe abnormal foot mechanics. And I think to do that, I'd like all of us to start on the same page by having that foundational knowledge. So would you just walk us through what normal gait looks like? Like what is normal gait? And then go through kind of like the foot and the various phases that are going on as somebody takes a step.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to think about this is the foot is a rocker. Mm-hmm. So when we're watching someone walk, it should be beautiful. It should be smooth. It should be efficient.
Yep.
And the foot has been designed to do just that. So there's these different rockered systems to the foot. So, and keep this in mind, there's a very big difference between a walking gait and a running gait. So I'm talking about walking gait here.
Yep.
Okay. When we're walking, the grazing of the heel is important. There's a reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's that first rocker, which is heel rocker.
Yep.
When the heel hits the ground, that's like the braking mechanism.
Yep.
So the first stage of the walking gait cycle, heel rocker, is all about shock absorption. So I have my foot model here.
Yes.
So when the heel hits the ground, think of it as like, I like to equate it to a pole vaulter. So the pole hits the ground and they kind of vault over.
Yep.
It's similar with this braking mechanism at the foot. So you hit the calcaneus and then you start to vault over the foot.
Yep.
The heel starts to unlock and then the foot slowly starts to hit the ground. And I use the word slowly because it should be controlled.
Yep.
So I think when I teach my gait courses, I always say, just close your eyes and listen. Because when you're listening to someone walk, you can really hear a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Because when someone hits the ground hot and heavy, and their foot slaps the ground,
yep,
you can probably be pretty certain that they don't have good eccentric control of their pretibial muscles.
Okay.
So that's tibialis anterior extensors.
Yep.
So I think especially at the foot, it really comes down to two things, and this happens at each rockered phase, is adequate ranges of motion and eccentric strength.
Okay.
So at heel rocker, I control the rate at which the foot drops. Now, what happens if I don't have good strength capacity there? I have a tibial stress fracture. I have shin splints. I have medial tibial stress syndrome because you can't control the rate at which that foot hits the ground.
Yep.
So you'll start to see those things. So then after we get to heel rocker, now I get into ankle rocker. And this is when I think all the magic happens. Because again, here's that eccentric word again. As my lower leg starts to go over my ankle, it's now my soleus that eccentrically controls the rate at which my lower leg comes over my ankle. So again, we have to have a very strong soleus. I love the plantar flexors.
Yep.
And then our arch starts to drop. So we're still shock absorption here. What helps control the arch dropping? Well, now you have eccentric control of post-tib, for example.
Mm-hmm. Big
time player. So in the beginning of the gait cycle, you have all these beautiful things happening to absorb shock. And the more strength and capacity we have of these tissues, we can control the rate.
Yep.
And when we can't control that rate and we start speeding through these rockered systems, that's when you're going to start to see, repetitive strain and symptoms at the foot.
Yeah.
And then at ankle rocker, right, now we have our body weight that's starting to drop the arch.
Yep. So
now we're in pronation. And now it's okay. Now it's time to propel forward.
Yep.
The foot's really cool, right?
It is
because
cool.
I'm going to talk about this little tie bar mechanism, which I think is it's a free mechanism of the foot. So when my foot unlocks, I'm an ankle rocker now. So now your foot is splaying.
Yep.
The foot should lengthen and widen at mid stance.
Yep.
When that happens, there's a ligament that runs across the metatarsals. When the ligament is tugged on, if you will, there's receptors there that tell the body, hey, we're about to propel forward. You better get into a rigid lever position. It's called the tie bar mechanism.
Okay.
So the plantar fascia is right there. So it inserts right at these metatarsal heads. You have the deep transverse metatarsal ligament. So everything is just designed to say, hey, let's get out of pronation and let's get going here.
Yep.
So when we take that away and we compress the forefoot, I'm talking narrow shoes here.
Mm-hmm.
You're taking away a free mechanism of the body. Don't make it harder on yourself.
Right.
So as we start to propel now this is where all the load happens. So at forefoot rocker, I should be in a rigid lever. My foot should be compacted, and we should be very stable to propel forward. And that's why I think you see so many injuries at the forefoot.
Yeah.
Bunions, metatarsalgia, it's a generic, diagnosis, but neuromas and all of these things, because the foot has to be strong at propulsion.
Yep.
And they did a really cool study. The windlass mechanism. So the windlass mechanism is when you lift the big toe and the arch, compresses.
Yep.
And they used to think that was the primary reason of why we got into this, rigid lever position that would allow us to propel forward. But they did a study where they anesthetized the intrinsic muscles of the foot and then looked at the power of push off through the first MTP joint, and it was decreased. The power decreased. So what we know now, right, and I think we've known this for a while, is that as soon as that heel comes off the ground, the intrinsic muscles of the foot are big players in putting that foot into that rigid lever position, which I think is encouraging. Get your foot stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope you're done. And not because I want you to be done, but because I want to chime in here, because you just hit on two really important points. And I think too often people miss the fact heel rocker is an important thing, right? Very important. And you talked about shock absorption and distributing forces. Basically every basketball player that I work with has anterior knee pain. And what are two of the most common things I see? Either little or no heel contact whatsoever, or when they get into that ankle rocker position, literally they hit and they're through it immediately. It's so fast, it's so rapid. So, no wonder they all have anterior knee pain, right? Their ability to absorb and distribute forces from the ground up is significantly or negatively impacted because they don't have proper foot function, proper foot contact.
You can't build a jet engine on a paper airplane.
Yeah.
100%. And I see that community too, I think could be very, very well served by getting stronger from the ground up. Very well served.
Well, we do a lot of stuff the first month where they're just not in shoes. And immediately they're like, oh my gosh, I just feel better. I'm moving better. I'd like to think it's the programming, but I'm sure the barefoot, getting them out of the shoes probably helps a little bit too. Okay, so something you mentioned, and I think this is really important to note too, big differences from walking to running. They're not necessarily one and the same. So could you kind of break that down and what changes when we move from walking to running?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to it, but I think there's really two things to consider and that people always talk about is strike patterns.
Okay.
So for example, we could have a whole conversation about heel strike, midfoot striking, and forefoot striking.
Right.
And people love to get in arguments about this too.
Yes.
In a walking gait cycle, you want to be grazing the heel. That's what initiates that braking mechanism.
Yep.
In a running gait cycle, there's a big camp out there that would say heel striking is a no-no because it puts too much load through the body. And I would argue that it's not necessarily how the foot strikes, but where the foot strikes.
Okay.
So when you strike, I think the enemy here is the heavy overstriding that can occur in a running gait.
Yep.
If you can get your foot, you want to think about getting your foot as close to your center of mass as possible. Mm-hmm. And some runners are very good at doing that, and they just compensate with a lot of knee flexion. Mm-hmm. So they can still strike that heel closer to their body. They just get more knee flexion out of it.
Right.
But when you bring your foot closer to your center of mass, most will adopt more of a midfoot or even a forefoot strike. And then that's, it just changes load, right? So you heel strike, you put load through the knee and through the hip and through the back. You forefoot strike, you put load through the foot and through the ankle. Mm-hmm. So it's just a matter of changing load. And I think that's important when we're looking at, getting our runners back to running.
Yep.
Because if I'm a runner and I have an Achilles issue, maybe when I'm running and I start to feel my Achilles talking to me, or maybe I adopt a grazing of the heel for a minute or so just to change the load. Mm-hmm. And then I can go back and, so you can kind of play around with those things. And, our running population is going to run anyway, so we got to find ways to work with them.
Yes.
And then I think another big factor with our running population is understanding that it's all about controlling rotation. It's all about how well we control rotation. If you think of, the lower limb is a skewer.
Uh-huh.
So when my foot hits the ground, we're fighting gravity. I mean, it's gravity that's internally rotating my entire lower limb. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Right? That's a good thing. It's, again, this is our, shock absorption. Runners have to be very strong.
Yep.
To control that rotation, because now I have gravity and I have more load. Mm-hmm. And I think from a gait perspective, if we start running on our forefoot, which, some would argue is the way we were designed, midfoot, forefoot striking, you better have a really strong system.
Yeah.
In order to be able to do it.
Yeah.
And, I still, with my runners out here, I'm like, they just want to run.
Yeah.
I was one of them.
I know. Yeah.
And the older you get, I was talking to Dr. Peter Malliaris yesterday, and he's a big tendon researcher.
Okay.
And I was saying, the risk factors of, our runners for, maybe reducing the risk of tendinopathies. And I said, what can we do? He's like, well, you just get old. I was like, yeah, but you have to train for capacity.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think that's an important thing to consider.
Yeah. Well, I just laugh because I've worked with my fair share of endurance athletes over the years. And trying to get them to do anything other than just go out and go for a run can be like pulling teeth. But I feel like sometimes every now and then you get those little wins with them. Like, hey, man, just give me 2 days a week in the gym. Let's do some strengthening stuff. Let's do some things that are going to work on these underlying foundational issues that you have. And hopefully that'll keep you running at a high level for the next 15 or 20. Right. But it can be difficult.
And it is, if you can get somebody on board with that stuff, it's game changing.
Yes.
And then especially getting the foot strong.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. So in the interest of full disclosure, I've been stalking your IG page for a while now. So be prepared for all the nerdy questions coming up here.
I'm here for it.
I know you are. So one thing that you talked about quite a bit is the idea of a big toe push off, or high gear, as you call it. And I love like cool terminology that like resonates with people, with athletes. So kind of two-parter here. Number one, why is high gear important? And what are some of the common compensations you might see when someone doesn't have access to high gear?
So when you think of the foot pushing off of the ground, if you can visualize this, high gear push off is when the majority of the body weight is pushing through the first and second toes, the first and second metatarsals.
Yep.
So the forefoot should be in one plane. I'm pushing through 1 and 2. And then my rear foot is inverted. So it's in that locked position. Mm-hmm. The first metatarsal is twice as wide and 4 times as strong as the lesser metatarsals. That's it. It's just the way this thing was designed.
Right.
We were designed to push off of the toe that is bigger and stronger. Mm-hmm. And I know there's arguments out there about that, but it's just basic facts.
Yes.
So high gear push off is getting to toes 1 and 2 and the foot in that rigid position. A low gear push off would be if you were watching someone walk and you were behind them instead of it looking like they were pushing through their big toe, it would look like they're almost going to sprain their ankle. Like they'd be pushing off their lesser metatarsals. Mm-hmm. And they can do that either to the side, like, in the frontal plane, yep, or they can spin through the foot in a rotational plane.
Yep.
So they're either going to push off laterally or they're going to kind of spin through. And those are both considered low gear push-offs. So why would someone do that? Well, first, they could have changes at their big toe. So with our athletes, we'll see a lot of turf toe, for example. You'll see, and to be clear, I think a functional hallux limitus is very different than a hallux rigidus. And a lot of these athletes that I see, they'll be diagnosed with a rigidus when they still have some range of motion of that big toe that I really think can be restored with proper function.
Okay.
It's a fine line. You have to make sure you're not impinging the joint. But with activation of peroneus longus and getting the foot stronger, if you catch those cases early enough, you can make all the difference in the world. Mm-hmm. But if they have pain at their big toe at push-off, they're not going to want to propel through it, so they're going to go into low gear push-off.
Right.
Ankle mobility. If there's restrictions in ankle dorsiflexion, for example, they'll spin through their foot and go into low gear push-off. I mentioned peroneus longus. Peroneus longus is a beautiful muscle that stabilizes the first ray. It drops the head of the metatarsal so that the big toe can extend over it. So what injuries cause disruption or dysfunction of peroneus longus? Ankle sprains. Mm. So your chronic ankle sprains, even your mild ankle sprains, that should be immediately assessed to see how the function of that tissue is and can they actually get to their big toe? Because if not, guess what's coming? Another ankle sprain.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you just see these recurrent issues. I think all of those things need to be addressed so that we can get to high gear push off. And then what you'll see on the other end of that, if you cannot get to high gear push off and you're pushing off the lesser toes, you start picking a diagnosis: neuromas, stress fractures. If I'm pushing off laterally, mm-hmm, that's where those compressive fifth metatarsal stress fractures can occur.
Yep.
If they're pushing off the lesser metatarsals in more of a rotational position, bunions, post-tib, plantar fasciitis. So that's why I'm not a big diagnosis person, and I think clients get too caught on I have this. It's, hey, let's just improve your function rather than chase all this, diagnosis around.
Mm-hmm. Man, a lot to unpack there. A lot to unpack, because literally as you're describing these different low gear push-off positions, I'm thinking, oh, that's a fifth metatarsal injury. That's a bunion. Would you mind just giving us a little insight? Like, if somebody comes to you, I probably could have started with this earlier, but what does the assessment process look like for you? Is it as simple as hey, let's do a case history, let's watch you walk? How in depth are you going with that? Because at some point you have to see them do these things, right? So you can say, okay, hey, I'm seeing X, Y, and Z, and here's how we're going to go about treating it.
Yeah. One of the things I love about the foot is I think it's the first place where you can see aberrant load, and really the only place in the human body. Mm-hmm. Because you can see a bunion, you can see a Taylor's bunion, you can see a hammer toe, you can see these things.
Yep.
And you don't come out of the womb with them. So I know that you have connective tissue things that we have, and there's genetic factors, but that's why I think tapping into the kids is where it's at, but that's a whole nother conversation. But I first just look at them. What am I seeing?
Yep.
And then we go from there. I ask them, when they're standing, how does their foot feel? What part of their body are they loading? And half the time when you have poor sensory awareness at your foot, they won't even be able to feel parts of their foot. They're like, I feel the inside of my big toe. I'm like, where's all your pain? My big toe. So, a lot of it is just, I spend a lot of time on education. Hey, I want you to feel different parts of your body. Stop hanging out and loading just the medial column of your foot.
Yeah.
And then we do gait assessment. So I watch them walk. I say that gait assessment takes you to the stadium. It doesn't take you to the seat.
Okay.
So it's a tool to see things like low gear push off. And then I can say, okay, I want to look at the range of motion of their big toe. I want to look at the range of motion of their ankle. And then we get into, a lot of capacity testing. I think a calf raise is like, you can see so much, so much.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, I see people that have been in pain for a while or, surgeries, things like that. But to do a solid calf raise where I'm like, yes, that's beautiful. I get excited because you have to be able to come up onto your forefoot. And I mean high. I think when we do rehabilitation, often for, Achilles and plantar fascia issues, a calf raise it's not mid-range unless that's what you're looking to do. But you got to get up on the ball of the foot.
Yeah.
And people will be like leaning into the wall, they'll bend their knees, or they'll like be outside on their toes. And, I think that it's a very, very good assessment to see what their motor patterns are.
Yes.
And I love those little tests. And I think one of the other ones that is a big one is getting people to actually find pronation at their foot. I don't think people feel what it's like to actually lengthen and widen their arch.
Yep.
And especially when you've had patients that, have been, they had plantar fasciitis 20 years ago and they've been in an orthotic for 20 years and like a Brooks Beast. Their arch hasn't lengthened in 20 years.
Right.
And then they wear the shoe at home and then they wonder why things aren't getting better or they're having this symptom and this symptom because there's no load happening.
Yeah.
So getting people to actually feel what the foot feels like to unlock and lengthen is a lot of the work that I've been doing recently.
Super interesting and kind of fits in well here because, a lot of times people will get diagnosed, right? I'm sure you've seen and heard every diagnosis in the book at this point, but people get diagnosed with having flat feet, right?
Yeah.
And it'll sound like, oh my gosh, you have stage 4 cancer or something super serious. What I would love to hear from you, because I don't think flat feet are a bad thing. They're a part of the gait cycle, right? And for a lot of my athletes, they're performance enhancing, right? For certain reasons. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on just flat feet as a whole and maybe why someone might present with them.
I have so many patients to come in here and that's the first thing they tell me. Almost all of them.
Yeah.
I have flat feet. And I have to tell you, I have a little, it's called a pedograph. It's a footprint, like an old school, like nothing fancy. There's nothing digital. You walk across this ink pad and you get to see the pressures on the foot.
Okay.
I cannot tell you how many times I've put people on there and I'm like, this is not a flat foot. This is not a flat foot. I don't know who told you that. Does it crush their
soul? Does it crush their soul? Or they're like, no, I've had this like thought for 20 years.
Well, I'm always like, who told you this? Right. And, and listen, there are certainly very well-educated people in running shoe stores. But there's some, where it's like you go in, someone takes their shoes off. And when we're standing, if you were standing in front of me, most of us stand in a position of mild to moderate subtalar joint pronation. So it will look like the foot is pronated, which is completely normal. There's so many variations of the design of the subtalar, of the talus and the articulation of the joint that we should not be all up in arms seeing this going, this is a flat foot.
Right.
And then trying to block it with, an orthotic and a shoe and a this and a that. But to get back to your question with flat feet, I think it's like it's like an epidemic, and it shouldn't be.
Right.
There's a difference between rear foot pronation and midfoot pronation. So rear foot pronation is when it looks like like I was just talking about, like that mild to moderate, where the rear foot looks like it's caving in, and I use that word loosely. I don't like to even say that word to my clients, right?
Right.
Those feet, typically, when they do a calf raise, for example, they can get into that rigid lever position. And that's when I know I'm like, you're all mine. Let's go to town here. Because this is a foot that needs to be stronger. Let's just get this foot stronger.
Right.
When you see midfoot pronation, so that's when the navicular, that's the highest, the navicular is the highest point on the arch, the medial aspect of the arch. You will have patients that come in where that guy's on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, you won't see too many of them, but they are out there. And that can be a little trickier because a foot that stays in that really excessively pronated position for very long periods of time, when once may have been flexible, has now become rigid.
Yes.
So it's a forefoot supinatus. It can be driven by forefoot, and that's we won't go down that road, but you have to really differentiate the two, because one foot, you're going to have really good success on strengthening. And like I said, you will see more of those, but the one where the foot is stiff and rigid and that midfoot is you're pancaked, you have to say, can I rehab this foot? And a good assessment for that, right, is I'll just have them, here's your pancake foot standing on the ground. When they take their foot off the ground, if I get a little recoil there, like I see that arch start to pop up, I get excited about that. I'm like, we can restore some of this.
Okay.
But if I go pancake on the ground and I lift it up and that thing stays flat, that's definitely a more complicated flat foot case, because now that has turned rigid.
Yep.
Or has become rigid. And that's when you really have to find ways to make them comfortable, because that can be a very uncomfortable gait.
Gotcha. Okay. So you've mentioned a handful of times foot strengthening. And I feel like there's a lot of ways we could take this, and we're going to talk about barefoot training later, so I don't want to go there just yet. But just talk to me about low-level foot strengthening. Somebody's listening to this show, it's like the person that wants to go to the gym and start working out a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh, I, read these articles and I know I should do a squat and a hinge and a push-up, whatever. What are some foundational foot strengthening exercises? Maybe somebody doesn't have pain, but they're like, no, I can see the value in this. Where do I start?
Well, I have like some fun at-home assessments that you can kind of do, right?
Yeah.
So if you were just standing and you were going to lean forward, right? So your whole body would lean forward.
Yep.
At the tips of your toes, they should flatten, and you should see what's called like a wink sign. So it looks like a little crease in the distal aspect of the toe.
Mm-hmm.
That means that flexor digitorum brevis, so the muscles of your foot, are working as you start to tip forward. Sometimes what you'll see there is people will claw, they'll hammer, they'll curl their toes. That is a sign that foot strengthening needs to occur. Which, by the way, weak toes is one of the biggest predictors of falls in the elderly. So it is a mandatory thing that we do in here for prevention as well, or reduce risk if you're not a prevention person.
Yeah.
The other one is to take a credit card, and you're sitting on a chair, right? Your foot's directly underneath your knee. Put a credit card underneath your big toe and have somebody try to pull the credit card out from under your big toe. Can you hold the card there without hammering the toe? And when you press the big toe into the floor, you should feel your arch engage. You should feel like there's tension underneath the arch.
Right.
And then I take that card and you put it underneath 2 through 5. and you do the same thing. Can I press 2 through 5 into the floor and feel my arch engage there? Can I hold that card there? And those are it's always very interesting to me because I have a dynamometer where I muscle test all of that and I get a nice number, but people can't do that at home. Always. It is so consistent that the side that cannot do these things, I have plantar fasciitis, I have this, I have that. So it's a good baseline, I think, for people to do to start at home to get going on this stuff.
Yep.
And then from a basic, if you wanted to just get started, I think dexterity, toe dexterity is important. Mm-hmm. Feel the foot. Can you lift just your big toe? Can you lift just your four toes? Can you get fancy and lift all of your toes and just tap your big toe? Can you just tap your little toe? Which, shouldn't be difficult.
Right.
But it is.
You talked about your daughter up top. Were you into feet when you had your daughter?
I was. And I have a funny story for that because, when they're kids, they do those paintings at school and they put their feet on and then they make a butterfly with the soles of their feet.
Yes.
I have it. I had it hanging in my office and everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, your daughter's feet, that's so cute." And I'm just sitting there going, she needs to be barefoot more. We need to start working on her feet. And the kid's like 3. And I'm like, just stop, Courtney.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, that's the way we think, right? And you see kids and you see the amazing foot dexterity that they have. And then you look at your foot and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm a disaster, Yeah. Okay. That's perfect.
Every kid on the planet, the first thing they want to do is take their socks off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they want to feel the ground. There's all these sensory receptors. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it, man. And you literally, when you started talking about those self-assessments and you're talking about hammer toes and claw toes, I mean, you described every athlete I've ever worked with in the history of ever. So, I don't know if I've ever seen one where you get them out of shoes and you're like, oh, that's a really solid looking foot.
Yeah.
So many of them, you're just like, wow, we've got some work to do from the ground up. So
I think that hammer toe thing too can be a huge window for assessment of what needs to happen. Because if you watch someone walk, mm-hmm. you'll see really where those hammer toes start to come into play. And one of them is that terminal stance. So when I go to push off, my toes, if I have a weak foot, I'll hammer the toes. I'll claw the ground to try to propel forward.
Okay.
So at terminal stance, when you see hammer toes, it's flexor stabilization. They're trying to activate their flexors to stabilize their foot.
Gotcha.
So you got to work on their foot strength.
Yep.
Then when you'll see it is as their foot starts to swing through in swing phase. If you'll see the toes hammer coming through swing phase, mm-hmm. you need to look at their extension. Ankle dorsiflexion. Do they have good ankle range? Because that can be a substitution, extensor substitution.
Yep.
To try to clear the ground so they don't trip on their toes and fall forward.
Gotcha.
So depending on where you see those hammer toes, terminal stance, flexor stabilization, or swing phase, extensor substitution, that's why I said gait assessment takes you to the stadium and then you know right where to go. I'm either looking at their ankle range of motion or I'm looking at the strength of their feet.
Gotcha. Very cool. Okay. So one other thing that I was loving, and I talked about this before the show. I wasn't sure if I was going to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. I love people like you who are focused in one area, but don't lose the forest for the trees, right? Like you're looking at the big picture. You're looking at how all of the body works together in this dynamic, cohesive fashion. So I loved one of your posts, and I don't know if you create all of them yourself, but the post that you had a while back about tibial internal rotation, right? Yep. And you talked about it before. Tibial, internal rotation as a whole is important. So would you elaborate on the need for tibial internal rotation and why it's an integral component of effective gait?
It's such a good question, and I think it's so overlooked. everything's about rotation. And what starts the cascade of rotation is pronation, right? So the foot hits the ground. We have different places in the body for shock absorption. And number one is at that foot when we go into pronation and then ankle dorsiflexion.
Yep.
When the foot pronates, the tibia can internally rotate. So those motions are coupled.
Yep.
So I have ankle dorsiflexion. My tibia starts to internally rotate. So now I get knee flexion. And then that goes up the chain because now my femur can internally rotate. There's place number 3 for shock absorption.
Mm-hmm.
And that also allows contralateral hip drop. Place 4 for shock absorption. So when you start disrupting from the ground these opportunities for shock absorption, and in particular at the ankle, and then not allowing that tibia to internally rotate, you're going to have problems up the chain. So that when I was talking about earlier about finding pronation, you'll see clients try to do this, and the tendon of tibialis anterior will just be like, I'm like, settle, calm, right? I'm like petting it, you know, right. I'm like, stop firing this.
Right.
Because if my foot stays in that very rigid position, then I can't unlock the foot. I can't get ankle dorsiflexion and I can't get tibial rotation. And that to me is a recipe for problems up that kinetic chain.
Again, you pretty much described every athlete that I've worked with that has knee pain, right?
Yeah.
They lack that tibial IR, they lack that pronation. So again, they can't decelerate, they can't absorb or distribute. I hate all the terminology, right? Like some people want to say you can't absorb force, whatever, you know, however you want to think about it, absorb, distribute. You can't do those things effectively if you don't have tibial internal rotation. And it's just not something I hear a lot of people talk about, quite frankly. So that's why I was so excited to see you guys talking about it.
Yeah. Once you get it going too, and I think you said a key word there too, is deceleration.
Mm-hmm.
You know, controlling the rate. I always say that at the foot, it's about controlling the rate. And when we have these opportunities to help slow things down, like tibial internal rotation and being able to control that, I think is just massive. We got to take advantage of it.
Yeah. Well, you said it up top. The gait pattern has to be smooth, right? There's an element of smoothness or rhythm. And so either sometimes people just won't have it altogether, or two, again, what I see a lot as well is sometimes they'll have it, but they just blast through it, right? So they're not really like slowing down. They're not letting things unlock, store energy, release energy. It's just like this rigid, quick, and then you wonder why they have pain.
You can see it. You can see it coming.
Literally, you can see it coming. It's cool. Okay. I'm excited about this next one.
Okay.
Barefoot training.
Yes.
All the rage 10 to 15 years ago, right? Everybody had Vibram 5 fingers and was walking around barefoot everywhere. It seems to have cooled a bit since then. But, I mean, this is your world. This is your jam. So I want to know your thoughts on barefoot training, barefoot running, anything in between.
So I think it's interesting. And I was actually talking to Steven Sashin about this, and he's the guy who owns Zero Shoes.
Okay.
That Vibram lawsuit kind of put a big kind of halt in what, you know, this barefoot running community was trying to do, because the lawsuit was, intended for, it ended up being an advertising issue, right? That they made a claim, and then that was the reason for the suit. But what it ended up being explained to the public was that this was causing injury, right?
Okay.
Not that it wasn't supporting something, but that running barefoot was actually causing injury. And in fact, that wasn't the claim at all. So it's been interesting to see this world kind of recover from some of that, because it kind of stopped it in its tracks there for a bit. There's a study, and I sent this over to you, looking at, it was a small cohort, So there were 28 people involved, and they ended up having 20 people in the study. And there were all, as with any study, there were, certain factors that weren't there. There wasn't a control group. But I think the thing that was really interesting about this is they had 20 people that had symptoms of plantar fasciitis. And we know how difficult that is to treat.
Yep.
It can be extremely chronic. They can come back years later. I forget what the numbers are, but I think it's something ridiculous. Like 44% of people can have recurring symptoms up to 10 years after an initial diagnosis. So it's just one of those things that can linger.
Yeah.
And our treatments in the past for that, have been orthotics. And don't get me wrong, that therapy, orthotic therapy, can be very beneficial for things like this.
Yeah.
But it's therapy. I'm going to do this for a little bit, and then we're going to look at strengthening your foot. So in any case, 20 people, what they had them do was run for 15 minutes barefoot on grass every other day for 6 weeks. 19 out of 20 of them, 19 out of 20 at the 6-week marker had a decrease in pain, and at the 12-week marker.
Wow.
So call it what you will, but that is extremely, I know that, like I said, that there's all these, there's always going to be, there wasn't a control group and there wasn't this, but at the end of the day, these people felt better at running. So what happened? And when you look at strength capacity and you look at strengthening the foot, that's what's going to help with these patients.
Yeah.
Because flexor digitorum brevis, the muscle where you actually get the spur and plantar fasciitis, not in the plantar fascia, is getting strengthened when you run barefoot. It's load.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's interesting, especially when we talk about we need to load our squat and we need to load our deadlift, but we don't want to load our foot.
Right.
It's the tissue is no different in the foot than it is everywhere else. But that load has to be very slow and progressive. You would never tell someone to squat 100 pounds today, and then they're going to squat 200 pounds tomorrow.
Right.
So as far as the barefoot running, I think that it's not for everyone. If you've had surgeries or traumas, or you have a forefoot where you're trying to decrease the progression of your bunions, or you have, there's been changes to the foot, you need to be wise. The structure has changed. Sure. Can you still benefit from strengthening a foot? Absolutely. But I think getting into that type of running is certainly, how we were more designed to run.
Yes.
And I think there's ways to meet everybody where they are with that.
Yep.
If you're not going to barefoot run, you better be running in some type of shoe that allows your foot to be in a functional position.
Yes.
So I'm a big fan of wide toe boxes, for example. So you can still, here's the spectrum of barefoot we can still live in this functional foot world. It doesn't necessarily have to be barefoot.
Yep.
But you can still get the benefits of improving your foot strength, of adapting this running gait position, if you will, to strengthen the body, strengthen the foot, and reduce the risk of injury.
Yeah. I mean, I just think it's such a more powerful way to look at things too, versus I think so many times with feet, we've just been conditioned to, like you started, right? It's like, oh, get a better shoe. Oh, get an orthotic, versus being able to kind of unpack that and be like, wait, what can I do for myself, right? That's going to help my foot better, function better outside of all these other things, right? And look, I'm sure you've seen them, probably more than I have, but you've seen some feet where the structure does dictate function, right? And the structure is significantly altered. The rules are different. But for a lot of people that are listening and maybe working with people, hey, there's a lot of stuff that you can do, low-hanging fruit, that can probably make a big impact on how people move and feel.
Oh, I think it's huge, especially with this, we talk about physical performance. We're always looking for that one other thing to take it to the next level.
Yeah.
this is such an easy win, I think, when you start to look at getting stronger from the ground up, because a lot of it has never been addressed. I can't
Yeah.
tell you how many people and athletes I've looked at that I'm like, I can't, you're running an ultra and you can't give me 20 single leg calf raises here.
Yeah. Yes.
It's
Yes.
it's a low hanging fruit, just like you said, and one that can have very, very good implications for future performance.
Agreed. Okay. Courtney, big question time.
Okay.
If you could alter the space-time continuum and give young Courtney Conley one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, how much time do you have? The biggest thing I think would be to get some weights in my hand.
Okay.
I think as a young female athlete, we never talked about it. And I think even now I'm in the process of designing a strength training program for young girls.
Oh, nice.
Sparked by my daughter. And, I just think it would help so much. And that also means down at the foot. Like, I wish I'm like, Mom, put me in the right shoe. It would have saved so much. Like take the time back and you put kids in the right shoes.
Yeah.
I'm probably out of work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Because you put their foot in a position they want to be in, their foot gets strong, their mechanics look good, they can start to add load. And then it's just, we don't have these evolutionary mismatches.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I think we're seeing. I think we're seeing, especially at the foot, a lot of evolutionary mismatches. We weren't, these high numbers of cases with these diagnoses at the foot, we weren't designed to see. So yeah, that's what I would do. And I still yell at my mom for putting me in point shoes. I'm like, why'd you do that to me?
Right. Right. Look, it's probably not the best litmus test, but I think something that I always come back to when I'm concerned or I have questions about something is like, what would I have had to do 200 years ago? Right.
Yeah.
So chances are I wouldn't sit at a desk for 12 hours a day 200 years ago. Right. I wouldn't have had fancy shoes, whatever. It's like you kind of put things through that filter of, okay, how can I get my body back to more of that? Right.
Yep.
Like it's probably not the best filter. And I'm sure the naysayers will have their gripes with that. But I think it's a pretty good filter to hey, how do we get back to some of these base level movement foundations that we've really, frankly, lost over the last 40 to 50 years. So,
and I think we make it harder than it needs to be. I mean,
yes.
One of the reasons I'm so passionate about this is one of the best things with the panacea of medicine is going for a walk.
Yeah, I know, right?
Just go for a walk. And that's why my heart is so in this, because when people can't walk because their foot hurts, it's brutal. It's painful. It hurts me, because I know what it did for my mental health and my mental capacity, and still does every day. So, I don't think we need to make it harder than it is. We just need to get up and walk a little more,
Agreed. Okay. Last but not least, got our lightning round. So 4 fairly short questions.
Okay.
Your answer can be as long or short as you like. Number 1, favorite thing about Colorado?
Oh, I'm looking at it right now. The sun.
Yes.
I'm dying to get out there.
300 days out of the year, right?
Yes.
That's awesome.
And it's an all season state, you're doing something outside all year round.
Yeah. I love it. Okay. Number 2, obviously super successful. Widgate happens, the IG, all that. What was the impetus? Obviously you've been into feet, but what was the moment when you're like, no, I'm doing this. I'm going to create this and it's going to be a thing.
When I saw what an impact it had on my life, personally and physically. And then to this day, when I talk to my patients, it's like their eyes light up because this is information that they have not heard, even if they've had multiple surgeries or they've had sometimes it's just as simple as putting them in a shoe that feels good on their foot, which is just allowing their foot to splay. And that will never get old to me. My happy place is coming into this office and educating on this stuff, because I think we still have a lot of work to do. And I that will never get old. I love it. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to put this out there. And if you want me to edit it, I will. because I know people like you, obviously you've got a huge audience, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of people that want, your influence or they want your thoughts on shoes. Is there just like a general shoe that you like or that you're willing to share with us?
Ben O'Nig is a researcher. He's up at the University of Calgary, and he has done a ton of research on footwear.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, the best shoe, because we get this asked all the time,
yeah,
is the one that is the most comfortable on your foot.
Okay.
Now, with that being said, you can't argue that a shoe that allows your foot to be in a functional position, so there's room in it, and you're not, in a heel to toe drop of 10 millimeters, is going to be less comfortable. So that's where it's a very easy sell as far as footwear for me, because I'm like, listen, just put this on your foot and tell me how comfortable it is compared to what you're wearing now. So with that being said, I always meet the patient where they are. My non-negotiables for footwear is a wide toe box, number one.
Yep.
And ideally putting their heel and toe on the same plane.
I love that. I mean, yeah, I love that. Like those are two things. I didn't think of it like that, but yeah, especially because we get so many people in the sporting world. They love, I'm like, it's the equivalent of a high heel, right? Yeah. But it's just an athletic shoe.
Yes. And you can play around with, the cushion or the stack height, right? So people are like, well, I stand at I'm at a grocery store all day and I stand on concrete. That's fine. We're still going to allow your toes display. I'm still going to get you on a level playing field for your heel and your toe, but I'm going to put a little more cushion under you, like, an ultra running shoe, for example.
Yes.
And then once their foot gets stronger, and then they're going to say, I feel a little wobbly on all this cushion. Let me just dial it down a little bit. And then you have that like transition that really will start to happen naturally, because people will start to say, I feel better when my foot can hit the ground.
Yep. Okay. Very cool. Thank you for answering that. Because I'm sure, I know if I'm thinking it, other people that are listening are thinking it. Like, what are the general recs? So toe splay, the ability for the toes to splay, and level front to back. Yep. Love it.
And on our, as far as footwear questions, on my website, Gay Happens, there's a favorite product section. We have a list of shoes, and it'll be like athletic shoe, casual shoe, dress shoe, kids shoes. So everything, and they're all compatible with that wide toe box and what we just talked about.
Perfect. Well, I'll make sure I put a direct link in the show notes so people can find that easily. Two more. Number 3, what's the most difficult foot issue you've ever seen?
That's a good question. Probably the ones that have had multiple surgeries. Those are the ones when I see them coming through the door, because now I'm more on what can we do to prevent this from getting worse?
Yep.
And how we can prevent you from not going underneath that knife again.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And those are the tough ones, because once you start, cutting into the foot and disrupting the fascial integrity, and, listen, I'm not here. There is a time and a place, and I work with some excellent foot surgeons, and we have very good relationships, because when they're done with the surgery, if it's necessary, then they come to me, and then we start rehabbing and strengthening the foot. Mm-hmm. But when they have these surgeries and there's no care for the patient on the other end of that, of what needs to happen, those are the ones that I'm like, it's tough. But it's always hopeful. I mean, I had a woman in here the other day. She had 4 surgeries on her left foot and 1 on her right. And she came in, and this is why I love what I do. She's like, I just want you to know that I took, it made me cry now, a walk with my husband for the first time in like 8 years. And I'm like,
wow, that's amazing.
So, and I'm certainly not putting her in a thin soled shoe.
Right.
So I have her with some cushion underneath her foot, but she's in a wide toe box. We've worked on strength and mobility, and it's just, that's why we do what we do, right?
Absolutely. Like, and I know you know this as well, but man, those tough cases, you learn so much.
Yeah.
right? Like you earn your money, right? Like
Oh
you
yeah.
earn the money that because these people are challenging, but man, you learn so much as a practitioner because the rules are different, right? There's
Yes.
different constraints in play, more things you have to think about, take into account. They're hard and challenging, but man, they make you better for sure.
Yep. Yep.
Last but not least,
Okay.
what's next? What's next for Courtney Conley? What are you working on? What are you excited about? Anything?
Yeah. Um, we're launching our level 2 course, so I'm very excited about that. So looking at, our first one was assessing and now we're getting into treatment. So I'm excited about that. But I think the next couple years is going to be a heavy focus on the kids,
Mm.
And really starting to see what we can do, because I think that impact there, like I said, will really change the course of a lot of what we're seeing now, of this evolutionary mismatch, if you will. I'd love to intervene there and say, how can we work with these kids now so that, they can become better athletes with getting less injured, especially with foot injuries and things like that. So I'm kind of, that's sparking my interest, and I probably will never retire. My dad and I talk about that all the time. He's 76 and he's still has his business, and he's still, when it's never, I never looked at it as work,
It doesn't feel like it most days, does it?
No. And I feel very blessed to be able to say that.
Yeah, agreed. Years ago, my wife and I met with our financial planner, and they do the whole, "Oh, when do you want to retire?" And I'm like, "Oh, let's just say 55." And my wife, generally a little bit more reserved, laughs out loud. She's like, "You're never going to retire." I'm like, "Yeah, you're probably right."
Right.
Yeah. So I'm glad I'm with somebody else that gets that. I don't know. I'm just wired. I enjoy it. I love what I do. So,
yep.
Well, Courtney, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time. You are such a wealth of knowledge, super fun to talk to. Where can my listeners find out more about you, Gait Happens, all that good stuff?
Yeah, it's pretty much everything Gait Happens. Our Instagram account is Gait Happens. Our Facebook account, Gait Happens. Our website, gaithappens.com. So it's pretty easy.
I love it. That makes it very streamlined and easy to find. I'll put links in the show notes, so those of you that are listening in can find all of this easily. Definitely, I'm not just saying this because you're on here, easily one of the most impactful IG pages I found. Not a one-trick pony, so much great information and a nice blend of theory, things to start thinking about, and actionable stuff. So fantastic work. Courtney, again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Man, that was killer.
That was so fun.
Okay, good. I try and make it fun. I don't want it to be. I realize, everybody has a podcast now, right? Everybody. And so I can only imagine, I know how many podcast requests and invites I get. I can't even imagine what it's like for you. So I appreciate
I have to say, I enjoyed the questions up front.
Okay.
I like that. Some of these podcasts that I've been on, they don't do that. And I just think has such a nice flow, and where it's going, and I can make sure I have everything I want to talk about ready to roll. And
well,
I appreciate that.
Well, good, because there's certain things I know I want to talk about, but I find it helps too to kind of put them in some logical sequence.
Yeah.
Too, it just makes the show flow better versus if we're talking about feet and then we're talking about assessments and we're talking about training. If it's just all over the place, you don't have the same flow. So. But no, this was really fantastic, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So I think your show will be up next week.
Great. Yeah, just let me know when it's ready.
Yes, I'll send you, there's social media and stuff that we do with it, so I'll send you all that.
Awesome.
Would you be okay with, when you kind of walked through some of the foot stuff? I mean, I've got this recorded. If we just took that segment out and put it on YouTube or something like that.
Please. That'd be great.
Okay. And I'll make sure I share it all with you so you can do whatever you want with it as well.
That'd be awesome. I'll have to thank John, because he's the one that got us in touch with each other, right?
Yes.
How do you know him?
Man, so the basketball world is a small space. And so I met a guy at this random seminar, and he's like, "Oh, you'd love my guy, John. He trains JJ Redick." And I'm like, "Oh, wow. That's a big basketball name." So then he connected us, and we talked randomly over the years, and he's just a great dude.
Yeah, he's
great guy to talk to, again, our world is such a small space. So to meet like real, genuine people, that's fun. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have to thank him again.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it was nice to meet you. Yeah. We'll stay in touch.
Yes. Thank you so much, Courtney. Have a great day. Okay.
You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.